If your sales team suddenly had 10 more deals in the pipeline this quarter, what would you expect to happen? Would you feel confident those deals are going to close, or would you brace yourself for that familiar stall, where everything sounds positive and then you get hit with, "Send me some information," or "Let me think about it"? Because here's an idea that's uncomfortable, but incredibly useful. A lot of deals don't die because the product is wrong or the price is too high. They die because the conversation never got strong enough to earn momentum. The structure of the first few minutes and the tone you set early often decides whether the rest of the process feels easy or feels like you're dragging a reluctant buyer uphill. Think about the patterns you've probably seen. Prospects who seem engaged, then disappear. Deals where the rep says they loved it, but nothing moves. Opportunities that hang around the pipeline forever because the buyer needs time. Most of the time, that's not a closing problem. That's a conversation problem. So what's the simple shift that changes the entire dynamic? Permission-based questions. It sounds almost too basic, but used well, it's a game changer for trust, discovery, qualification, and next steps. Permission-based questions are exactly what they sound like. Instead of steering the call wherever the salesperson wants to go, the salesperson asks for consent before changing direction, going deeper, or moving into something more sensitive. It can be as simple as, "Would it be okay if I asked a few questions about how this is affecting your team?" Or, "Can we spend a couple minutes talking about what happens if this doesn't change?" Or even, "Would you be open to looking at a few options other companies typically consider in this situation?" Some leaders hear that and worry it sounds soft, like you're asking the buyer for permission to do your job. But when it's done correctly, it doesn't land as hesitant. It lands as confident and professional. The underlying message is, "I'm not going to push you. I'm going to work with you." And that matters because many sales conversations accidentally create pressure. Reps jump to solutions too quickly. They assume the pain instead of uncovering it. They push next steps before the buyer has agreed there's a real reason to take them. From the buyer's side, that can feel like, "I'm being led down a path I didn't choose," or "I'm being sold instead of understood," or "I'm losing control of this conversation." When buyers feel that, resistance shows up. Sometimes it's obvious pushback. Sometimes it's polite agreement followed by silence. Either way, it's friction. And permission-based questions flip the whole thing because they hand control back to the buyer. That might be the most powerful benefit right there. When you ask permission, you're signaling, "You're in charge here. This is your decision. I'm not here to corner you." And here's the irony. When buyers feel in control, they relax. They stop protecting information and start sharing it. They stop bracing for a pitch and start participating in the process. This is a great gut check for any sales leader. Does your team sound like guides, or do they sound like presenters? Presenters assume the right to continue. Guides earn it step by step. Trust gets built the same way. Not through credentials, not through a slick deck, not through name-dropping logos. Trust gets built through behavior, in real time in the conversation. Asking permission demonstrates respect. Respect for the buyer's time. Respect for their autonomy. Respect for their right to think out loud, to disagree, to slow down, to say no. Buyers may not announce, "I now trust you," but they feel the difference. They think, "This person is actually listening." They're not forcing the conversation. They're not assuming they already know my situation. And that trust accumulates one question at a time. Permission-based questions also change the quality of discovery in a big way. Poor discovery is one of the most common problems in sales. Reps stay at the surface, they miss the real business impact, and then they build proposals on guesses. And later, everyone wonders why the deal didn't convert. But when you ask and the buyer agrees, you've earned a right to go deeper. When someone says yes to a question, they're more likely to answer honestly. And if they hesitate or they say no, that's not a failure. That's data. That tells you where the sensitivity is, where the uncertainty is, or where the motivation might not be strong enough. Just imagine what would change if your team actually paid attention to where buyers were unwilling to go. How many deals would be saved because the real issue surfaced earlier? And how many deals would be disqualified sooner before they wasted weeks of time and inflated the forecast. Better discovery doesn't just improve win rates. It improves accuracy, cycle time, and rep efficiency. Now let's talk about qualification, because this is where a lot of teams struggle. Most salespeople dislike qualification because it feels awkward, and most buyers dislike it because it can feel like they're being grilled. Budget, decision process, urgency, internal politics, priorities, it can get tense fast. Permission-based questions make qualification feel collaborative instead of interrogative. Rather than barging into sensitive territory, you invite it. You might say, would it make sense to talk about how decisions like this typically get made on your side? Or can we explore whether solving this is actually a priority right now, or if it's something that can wait? If the buyer says yes, you move forward together. If the buyer says no, you learn something important immediately. No games, no pretending, no guessing, no filling your pipeline with deals that only exist because nobody wanted to ask the hard questions early. Another underrated benefit is momentum. Big commitments usually don't happen out of nowhere. They're built on small agreements. Permission-based questions create a string of small yes throughout the call. Yes, you can ask that. Yes, we can look at that. Yes, that would be helpful. Compare that to the typical pattern where a salesperson talks, presents, talks some more, and then at the end asks for a major commitment. A demo, a proposal, a meeting with the executive team, a signature. Which path feels more natural to the buyer? The one where they've been participating, or the one where they're suddenly being asked to jump? One important clarification: this is not about being passive. Permission-based questions aren't an excuse to sound timid or unsure. They're a tool for being intentional. There's a big difference between saying, is it okay if I ask something, and saying, can I ask a direct question that will help us decide if it makes sense to keep going? Same concept, totally different impact. So if you're leading a sales team, it's worth asking, have you actually trained people on how to ask permission with confidence? Not just the words, but the tone, the timing, and the intent behind it. Because when sales conversations improve, results tend to follow. Sales cycles often get shorter because there's less resistance. Deal quality improves because qualification is clearer and earlier. Buyers trust the process more because they feel respected instead of managed. And maybe the biggest win is this: selling stops feeling like a battle. It starts feeling like two adults working through a real business problem together, with clarity about whether it's worth solving and what happens if it doesn't get solved. So here are a few questions to sit with. How often does your team ask permission versus assuming they've earned a right to keep going? Do your calls sound collaborative, or do they sound controlled? Where might friction be showing up because the buyer feels pushed? And what would change if your team focused a little less on talking and a lot more on inviting? There's almost always a better way to have conversation. And better conversations almost always create better sales results. If you want a place to start, start here. Build the habit of permission-based questions and watch what happens to trust, discovery, and momentum.